As beloved as classic Mario is, you can't help but notice that when the series shakes stuff up a bit and steps outside of its comfort zone, interesting things happen. As I looked at across my last 3 videos, the Thousand Year Door was a grittier, darker take on the RPG offshoots, while the 2 Mario Lands on the Game Boy felt like odd facsimiles of what we knew from the NES and SNES. The third installment of these went further still. The development team had been worried that Super Mario Land 2 felt like a copycat of Super Mario World. How best to further alleviate that fear going forward? Take Mario out altogether. Enter Wario, Mario's antagonistic doppelganger from his previous 8-bit outing. R&D 1, evidently proud of their ingeniously named creation, brought him back for a starring role. Antithetical to the humble portly plumber, making Wario the protagonist allowed for a reshaping of the gameplay that reflected his more rough-and-tumble approach and self-centred attitude. It certainly struck a chord, as its anti-Mario unsensibilities sparked a range of Wario Land titles through the decades that followed. In this video, we're going to look at the 4 numbered entries in the mainline run and how the developers, striving for creative freedom bordering on rebellion, created a line of games with an almost punk attitude that simultaneously expanded and deconstructed the Mario-style platforming from which it stemmed. This thing is so tight on my head. The first Wario Land wasn't quite ready to have its dungaree strings cut upon release in 1994, judging by its subtitle of Super Mario Land 3. It is, in essence, a direct sequel, and Mario does make a brief appearance, but it's also as if they were trying to play it safe by tying it to their lucrative mascot. Living up to its moniker, it closely resembles its predecessor in terms of gameplay and presentation, more so than its follow-ups, and going so far as to have the same file select screen. Wario casually crashes through the fucking wall instead of gracefully entering via a pipe like Mario though, just to show what he's all about before you've even taken control of him. As we looked at in the last video, Super Mario Land 2 introduced Wario as the antagonist, kicked out of Mario's castle that he had taken over. Here, he would dip his pointy toes into an adventure of his own as he sets out to rob the brown sugar pirates of their treasure in order to buy his own castle that'll dwarf Mario's. That treasure? A stolen golden statue of Princess Peach. This takes him through some fairly generic climbs. Beach to mountain to cave to volcano to ship to forest to castle. It's less inventive in this regard than Super Mario Land 2, which had levels set in a haunted Japanese temple, a huge clockwork Mario, the belly of a whale, a sunken submarine and the heckin' moon, but these ones are still plenty of fun. Secret exits return from Mario Land 2, that game having adopted them from Super Mario World, meaning that there are even more courses to discover off the beaten path. Hell, there's even a completely optional iceberg area dubbed Sherbet Land, like the Mario Kart circuit. Control-wise, Wario is bulkier and less agile, which certainly makes sense from a character design perspective, but it can lead to him feeling cumbersome. There are some tight jumps required at points, from right on the precipice of platforms, but it's like you're having to contend with Wario's weight and restricted plane of movement as a matter of flawed programming, as opposed to a genuine deliberate challenge. The platforming still works reliably well for the most part though. From the start of the first stage, it environmentally teaches you about jumping to hit blocks as well as using the shoulder charge ability, like Mario's famous 1-1, with Wario munching raw garlic instead of mushrooms to gain strength. There's an interruption of Mario's simple jump-based combat. That only stuns Wario's foes for the most part, after which they can be picked up and thrown aside, even knocking out others they collide with. His other attacks are the best way of tackling them. There's a scrappy melee style here in comparison to Mario's more straightforward execution. Wario's power-ups feel remarkably strong too. There's a dragon helmet that just acts like a fucking flamethrower and incinerates any enemies in your way. The bull pot, meanwhile, makes him tougher and able to ground pound and stick to ceilings, while the jet pot allows him to fly forwards through the air. As though to balance this out, the levels get more intense quicker than they would relative to a Mario game. 1-4 is pretty demanding, where you need to run from the pouncer to avoid being crushed, but then also take advantage of it to cross pits. I've actually made similar stages in Mario Maker. This almost foreshadows the utilisation and avoidance of baddies that would become a recurrent feature in future sequels. It's a steep difficulty gradient that belies the Super Mario in the title, like Mario for grown-ups. The music has something more gruff and bassy about it from the outset, angry and borderline discordant relative to the usually breezy Mario melodies. It's like every facet of Wario Land is railing against the classics from which it was born. One thing it does retain is mini-games, available at the end of each level. There isn't much to these ones. One is just a 50-50 gamble for coins, the other is based around timing throws to hit enemies with bombs. They're quite uninteresting, but the series would come to be known for these, which perhaps even ultimately influenced the terrific WarioWare that followed in the next decade. Levels are completed by inserting coins into the exit door. This is one of the ways in which money is established as being more inherent to Wario's covetous pursuits. For Mario, coins are points. For Wario, they're currency. He can even use them as a weapon, taking out 10 coin pieces to chuck as projectiles, although it's kind of ironic he'd be willing to throw money away. However, you could also see disposable income, fittingly, as a source of strength for our Waza. After defeating the final boss, a genie under the command of the pirates' leader, Captain Syrup, the Golden Peach statue is unveiled. All of a sudden though, Mario appears in a helicopter and airlifts it away, seemingly even thanking a bemused Wario for his good deed. This is where he'd begin to lose the more malicious persona he'd previously been characterised with, becoming more of an unwitting hero who was out for his own gain but would inadvertently end up saving the day. Robbed of the thing that he was going to rob, the big man instead wishes for his own place, which the genie grants for a price. The amount of wealth he's accumulated by the end determines the size of the property that he receives. This variation of endings depending on score would recur throughout the series, and it's something they'd later use in Luigi's Mansion, which ends with the Green Plumber getting a more luxurious house depending on the amount of cash and jewels he collects. The shitty birdhouse I ended up with here isn't canonical though, since he's later living in a big castle in the sequel, Wario Land 2. This 1998 follow-up is where the series really took on a life of its own, introducing some more concepts that would persist through future entries and even dropping the Super Mario Land branding. I have so much nostalgic love for this, the first one that I played. It's one that I admittedly don't think I've touched since the Game Boy era, but replaying it for this video brought back so many memories of the hours I spent combing its myriad levels from top to bottom. I remembered layouts, secret paths and musical jingles nearly 30 years later, so ingrained is this one in my noggin. It starts off in Wario's castle, presumably the one he was granted at the end of Wario Land. He's awakened by the brown sugar pirates who just randomly show up and steal his shit one morning. Or so I thought to begin with, having not played the first game, but he did kinda start this beef, having done the same thing to them last time around. The story here follows the protagonist to get it back, although the default chapter takes place in the castle itself, its owner cleaning up some of the damage the burglars have caused, like flooding the place with a baffling giant faucet.
You left the water running, didn't you?
We're the wet bandits.
You're sick, you know that?
What's instantly noticeable is that the graphics take a bit of a step up. I know that sounds kinda ridiculous when discussing Game Boy releases, but some of the pixel art and shading, like the carvings of Wario's head in his castle halls or the big coins, is quite impressive even on such modest hardware. I mean, compare them to the crappy portrait of Captain Syrup in her Wario Land 1 boudoir. Wario's sprites are more refined and sleeker with a profile visage. He's no longer boxy with a face like a melted Toby jug, and he's smoother to handle too. He can't die here, only lose coins when inflicted with damage, although that might be an even worse fate for our avaricious anti-hero. But where's the challenge in a platformer when you're invincible? I pretend to hear you ask. Well, I say in reply to our imaginary exchange, enemies can often end up relocating you against your will, making you repeat certain obstacles. For example, Bobo the giant bird makes a comeback as a boss, Wario having boarded the SS Teacup again after rescuing his beloved pet chicken Ex Machina, who scared off during the pirates' escape from his castle. One of Bobo's attacks is to create a draft that will make Wario rise upwards. If he doesn't crouch, he'll ascend past a platform that he can't immediately get down from, making you retrace your steps to have another shot at victory. As frustrating as this can be, it's a creative way of managing the difficulty curve when you're effectively immortal. Another staple inaugurated here is actually utilising the consequences of enemy attacks to your advantage in place of power-up items. Where Mario has a certain grace to his abilities, like wielding fire, using a tail or cape to fly through the air and diving under the waves in a frog suit, Wario's are somewhat undignified. His Looney Tunes style ailments range from becoming morbidly obese to morbidly undead. He can, among other transformations, be flattened into a pancake to squeeze through narrow gaps, coiled into a spring to bounce skywards, and set alight to burn through flammable blocks. These come with their own advantages and disadvantages, so you need to work out when to use them or lose them. For example, in Maze Woods, there's a section where you let a bee sting Wario, which makes him swell up and float until he hits the ceiling. This lets you pass a towering wall, but on the other side, you're trying to reach a door at the bottom, so you then have to avoid the same bee stings you'd invited a moment ago, because now levitating will take you away from your destination. It's a smart bit of design that reframes the traditional idea of combat. Talk about fiends with benefits. These penguins throw black balls that daze Wario and make him stagger until you guide him into some water. In the uncensored Japanese version, they'd actually hit him with mugs of beer, and he'd staggered you to being shit-faced. I also laughed at how the wizard-like enemy turns out to be two smaller spearmen on top of each other with a cloak draped over them, like two kids trying to sneak into a pub. A big part of the gameplay is using the charge attack to smash through stuff. Not just visible blocks, but there are many hidden passages within walls now, so it never hurts to try slamming into them. It's hugely satisfying to uncover such a route, including the crunching sound that accompanies it, with at least one level devoted to the concept. I'd forgotten about the dreadful slowdown when crashing through lots of hurdles at once though. Actually, I probably wasn't old or educated enough to even understand issues like performance last time I played this. I guess the brutal action was too much for the humble old Game Boy to handle. Wario does have an unstoppable backwards recoil when hit, which can be f***ing infuriating when a slight bump with a hazard sends you hurtling down several screens, the apartment building being a prime example.
Oh my god!
I get there has to be some kind of penalty in lieu of a life system, but this often feels like a step too far. As for the levels themselves, some of them are so decidedly un-Mario, like the building I just mentioned where thugs throw glass bottles at you from the windows. It's like a Tuesday afternoon in Glasgow. You need to scale the building's exterior, using windows to take shortcuts through living rooms. You even play basketball with the chapter's boss, quite literally. The Wario Land series was really starting to carve its own niche here in terms of structure. Other settings include a moving train that you have to stop, a factory full of conveyor belts and mechanical contraptions, a sunken Atlantis-style temple, and a spooky mansion where Wario ends up rescuing the hapless thieves from the clutches of a ghost. I enjoyed the little segues showing Wario tracking down the pirates between chapters. They remind me of how Sonic 3 and Knuckles shows you how the action progresses to each new zone. Not deep writing by any means, but it's a little bit of expositional filler and flavouring that we'd never really seen from Mario's outings. One of my favourites has always been Get in the Teacup, as it feels like a little mini Odyssey, navigating your way to the coast and actually boarding the ship within the level, rather than on a map. Mario Land 2 might have inspired this, as it did similar things with areas like the Tree Zone, Space Zone and Macro Zone, having you progress through a themed set of stages rather than just being dropped into a world. Just as you think you've completed the game upon kicking Captain Syrup's harem-panted arse, you realise it's only the beginning. Each of these treasures, like Vase, Jewel, Sword and Racist Face, corresponds to a level, meaning that there are actually 50 in total. These can be accessed by, once again, finding secret exits, resulting in completely different story arcs and endings. There's no overworld map screen, so you wouldn't be expected to know this on a first playthrough, but after finishing one of these, you'll then be met with this flowchart of the branching routes upon reloading, showing you where to hunt for these narrative forks in the road. One of these is a decades-old memory that lingered in my brain while getting reacquainted with Wario Land 2. 8-year-old me had combed every nook and cranny of the castle in the opening stage looking for its apparent hidden exit, but ended up finding it by accident when I got distracted and didn't press anything at the beginning of one such attempt. It turned out that this means Wario sleeps through his alarm. This in itself has the story take a different route, leading to a much shorter arc in which he battles the pirates on his home turf. Here I was hunting high and low for solutions when you can complete the level without getting out of bed. With its more fluid controls and engrossing scope, Wario Land 2 is one I was enamoured with and that holds a special place in my heart. Its notion of revisiting locations would become a central component of 2000's Wario Land 3, which starts with a plane crash. Quite an opener. Crawling from the wreckage, the pilfering pilot finds a mysterious music box in a cave and is pulled into a magical world, tasked by a god to collect 5 other music boxes that will allow him to get home. To sweeten the deal, he can keep any treasure he amasses on his journey. This was the first entry to be developed specifically for the Game Boy Color, and it shows. There's an immediately noticeable uptick not just in the coloration but the degree of animation. Wario's antics are more fluid with a few more frames involved. He'll even scratch his arse if left on a ladder for too long. I initially found it odd that Wario couldn't ground pound or lift stuff. Then I realised there was a list of action tutorials on the menu screen, most of which were locked. That's when the penny dropped. He gains power-ups as he goes, emblematic of the most fascinating facet of this game. It's a Metroidvania. Well, not strictly, but it does involve returning to stages after acquiring these new items, which let you explore parts that were inaccessible before. Not entirely surprising, considering that multiple dev team members had also been involved in the Metroid series. In fact, Wario's creator Hiroji Kiyotake actually designed Samus too. It's weird how Wario temporarily forgets some of his old abilities, like being able to swim until he gets flippers, but it hasn't stopped them doing it in Metroid about 100 times. Wario Land 2 had you redo certain levels to find different paths, and this works as an expansion of that. A tutorial actually showed you a little clip of how new powers are used, and it satisfyingly clicks when you see how you can now interact with objects you've already seen but been forced to abandon. Brilliantly, it even shows you where to retrace your steps with your new powers. I never felt like I was wandering aimlessly for too long in this regard. Solutions presented themselves promptly, and new paths were generally evident, with required items and switches within a reasonable and intuitive distance from your goal. It can be a real slog to overcome some tricky obstacles and tussle with taxing adversaries to find a chest before realising the key was somewhere completely different, requiring some dreary backtracking, but this wasn't too common an occurrence for me. Finding new sections in old levels will unlock treasures that illuminate the way ahead in elaborate ways, like a jar that unleashes a rain cloud to fill a dried up pool and a lever to make a bridge go down.
I have heard to make a bridge go down, there is a lever. Look around.
Kill Jester.
As well as goofier ones like a little wizard dude who'll construct a climbable fence for you. One of the treasures is actually a Pokemon Pikachu gadget, which I discussed in my video about Pokemon's health and fitness history. Another big mechanic is the day and night cycle, changing the geography and the enemies that appear within, which also helps to delineate the way forward. You don't even need to unlock all the variations to finish the game, so it's a meaty experience for dedicated players. Like previous games, it has a recurring leitmotif, the melody transposed into a number of styles and tempos, from pleasant waltzes to rock shuffles, used to give everything a tone of familiarity while at the same time giving each area its own identity. 8-Bit Music Theory here on YouTube did a video about this for those interested. Speaking of enemies, Wario remains generally invincible here, and continues to use their transformations. I particularly like the one that turns you invisible. You need to sneak past a door with an eye that will lock if it spies Wario, but it also sets you the task of having to jump across platforms while being unable to properly see him. The riverbank cave is another great bit of design. You become a vampire bat to clear a path, avoiding the water. You then use the water when it's time to revert back to normal, only to have to avoid the bats that just bit you, to be able to break a block in the next room. After this, you go down to retrieve a rock, while avoiding fire that'll make you drop it, to break through a wall at the top to find fire that Wario should self-immolate with, to be able to burn down a wall in the previous chamber. It's a really gratifying bit of lateral puzzle solving, mixed with engaging action platforming. As always with Wario titles, it's knowing when not to use power-ups that's the key to success. That's sometimes easier said than done though, with the horrible recoil still in place, and enemy positioning making things unnecessarily difficult here and there. The bears that freeze you and send you sliding back, I hope have since become rugs in a hunting lodge. Well, some of the foes are irksome, to say the least. Some of them are pretty cool, like the intimidating Robo-Mouse that chases you through tight tunnels, and the twist on Super Mario Bros. 3's Angry Sun, which is replaced by the moon at night. Check out my video on Super Mario All-Stars where I talk about how that thing freaked me out a bit. An apparent relative of the hoop-shooting hare this time challenges you to a game of football, complete with a tortoise goalie. That's not the only bit of sport. Wario Land 3 features an infamous golf minigame, of which I'm not much of a fan. I couldn't even figure out what the hell to do at first with no tutorial, but once you get the hang of it, it's not as painful as it seems. The real problem is that you're forced to play it over and over and over again throughout the game. I can't imagine anyone would disagree that it would have been better relegated to optional bonus content or something. Wario Land 3 is definitely the longest and most ambitious of the series. To be honest, I found it to be a bit of a drag at times with all the backtracking, not helped by the fact that it didn't really build to any crescendo. After coming back to the first level for a run-of-the-mill treasure, I was suddenly ushered to the starting temple to face off against Poundland Pennywise. There was no sense of anticipation or climax, like scaling the pirates' hideouts in the past. It just kinda ended. That might just be me though. Maybe other players would do things in a different order and end up having a more cohesive experience. Still a decent entry though, with plenty to see and do, but not a patch on Wario Land 4. Here we go, the daddy of them all. For my money, probably the best of the four. It's definitely one of the Purple Plunderer's finest hours and one of the greatest Game Boy Advance titles ever. The only Wario Land on said handheld, this one saw Yoshio Sakamoto join the development staff, mainly known for his involvement in 2D Metroid platformers alongside Kiyotake. Ironically, 4 doesn't continue the Metroidvania aspect of its predecessor. In fact, it actually regresses from the rest. It's much more linear, lacks multiple stage exits, and resurrects the health bar. They fixed the horrible recoil at least, so while Wario can take damage again, you have more control over him. It's as though it's burning everything down to start again, but still, Wario manages to rise from the ashes like a fat yellow phoenix. Such is the disruptive nature of this series and its refusal to conform to expectation. Now living in a city and cruising in a flashy car, he reads a newspaper article about a legendary pyramid discovered in the jungle. He sets out there, eyes bulging with imagined riches, only to fall into the depths of the pyramid, and having to navigate his way back out while nabbing treasure along the way. He bumps into an elderly archaeologist, quite literally, is stalked by a mysterious black cat, and assisted by a shopkeeper who resembles Mr. Game & Watch. The first thing to note about this game is it's absolutely gorgeous, although obviously it has the advantage of being on the advanced console compared to its forebears. Its colourful phantasmagorical worlds drip with charm, from the popping cartoonish backgrounds to the expressive, intricately detailed characters, including the re-sprited Wario himself, things like his flabby cheeks rippling when he becomes enchonkened, and how he'll start skipping if you leave him idle for too long. While the earlier games were quite irreverent in their own right, Wario Land 4 brings with it something of a tonal shift into a very distinct atmosphere, like a giant leap into Japanese surrealism, and the most evident precursor to WarioWare. In a series of black sheep, this is the blackest. The pyramid consists of 4 main passages, all of which have 4 levels, accessed via paintings, Super Mario 64 style. Even including the tutorial and final course, it's far fewer than former entries, but I'd argue for the better after Wario Land 3, as it feels more streamlined and less all over the place. There's a theme running through each of them. The Emerald passage is nature-based, the Ruby passage is sort of industrial or mechanical, the Topaz passage is centred around toys and games, and the Sapphire passage deals in horror. You can tackle these in any order you like. The goal of each stage involves stepping on a frog switch to reopen the portal you started at, then racing back to it within a time limit, after which Wario starts to lose health, and when that's depleted, coins. Again, seemingly a fate worse than death for him. The nerve-wracking music that spurs you on, complete with discordant clock chimes and Wario shouting "hurry up," can turn even peaceful stages into frenetic stress tests. You'll also need to find a key-nosed creature dubbed Keezer in each one to unlock the next chamber, as well as 4 pieces of a jewel to confront the passage's boss. Your surroundings frequently change on the way back. Not only will transparent frog blocks turn solid, barring your way and taking you on detours, but it has bespoke effects on certain landscapes. One of the most enthralling is Fiery Cavern, which chills from an active volcano into an icy glacier, its lava eruptions becoming frozen platforms to let you reach new heights during your escape. Avoiding the transformative fallout of attacks piles on extra pressure when you're against the clock, like the bees in Wildflower Fields who'll make you float off course and into danger. In this way, it intensifies the components established in the previous games, making things a whole lot more frantic and a whole lot more Wario. This race against time has an air of Metroid around it actually, so maybe that influence was still making its presence felt after all. On the subject of Wildflower Fields, let's talk about some of my favourite locales. I love the lazy, laid-back ambience of this one, soundtracked by country music, punctuated by the tweets and ribbits of the wildlife. It starts as your average bucolic stage, with high-up hidey holes and subterranean caves to explore, entering an aquatic subterranea of rapid currents before realising that Wario is swimming up the stem of a huge sunflower that towers above the clouds. Arabian Night is also pretty stunning, with its cold outdoor streets contrasted with exotic lamplit interiors and Middle Eastern style music that morphs from slightly foreboding to bittersweet. It's the hangout of aggressive axe-wielding mummies. It's barbaric, but hey, it's homely. They should really have some badass scimitars though. The stage boasts some unique features. There's an ornate Arabic bath used to cleanse status conditions, while one of the rooms involves jumping into a tube to inexplicably change the types of enemies present, then using them to reach the key. Crescent Moon Village, also in the Sapphire Passage, is haunted by a who's harmless on your first pass, but will quickly become a menace as it snatches Keezer from you on your way back, causing you to waste valuable time giving chase. For as much as the Wario Land series is adept at introducing an idea and then building it up, I kind of love these random mechanics that unapologetically appear for one level then bugger off. Same goes for Domino Row, which has you race against collapsing dominoes that will impede your progress if you don't get to the end before the last one falls. The big board is similarly unorthodox, bordering on mental. Not only is it
all made of f***ing Lego,
but it has roulette wheels that when stopped at a certain number will move that many spaces along a board at the bottom, causing random outcomes depending on where it lands, kinda like Monopoly. This requires timing that borders on luck rather than skill, and can feel quite unfair, but it's another way the game doesn't care much for convention, or even reason. Towards the close, you're on a timer to escape and need to get to the end of the board while trapped in a room, spinning the roulette repeatedly and dealing with whichever undesired effects occur while you're on the clock. It's a bewildering gimmick. Then there's its interior, where the background is just these nightmarish dolls. Same goes for the Curious Factory. I'd either never noticed or forgotten about the huge ominous robot you can see in the background. Each level has at least 2 pink areas, bonus rooms where Wario can nab some treasure after solving a puzzle, often involving a bit of casual elder abuse as he throws around the scientist to clear the way. This is Dr. Ario Shitine, who's actually appeared in numerous Nintendo games, including Wario Land 3 as the scientist who turns you invisible, and whose hobbies include jerking it, according to this fan Q&A from Wario Land 4's Japanese website. This pink area, in the slidey 40 below fridge, cleverly has you manhandle an enemy into the right position before letting yourself be hit by its ice attack, causing Wario to freeze and slide through spikes without taking damage to reach the prize on the other side. These rooms push your understanding and mastery of the game's physics, and they're always a very welcome break from the action. You know what? As I was gathering my thoughts on some of these, I realised something. In certain places, this is as much a Sonic game as a Mario one. It hit me around the pinball zone, which is actually more like basketball, but gaming's most famous hedgehog is no stranger to pinball stages. A common mechanic through the Wario series is rolling into a ball to smash through narrow tunnels, but I'd say it's most reminiscent of Sonic here. Wario's new dash attack also sees him run at full tilt with his arms outstretched behind him, not unlike how the blue blur started to move around the same time. The aforementioned fiery cavern gave me big lava reef zone vibes, both in its funky music and visuals that change from burning hot to icy blue in its second act. The toxic landfill, meanwhile, recalls the industrial aesthetic common in Sonic, the opposite of Mario's idyllic world. The pink areas bring to mind the bonus stages from Sonic on the Master System too. And ultimately, how better to rebel against the institutions of Mario than being more like Sonic? On the subject of music, it'd be egregious not to mention it when it comes to this game. It's a genre-spanning soundtrack and one with more earworms than a stray dog. The de facto first level, Palm Tree Paradise, actually has a proper song with lyrics and everything. They're compressed to shit due to the hardware, sure, but this was still really striking to hear coming from such a device back in 2001. Same goes for the title screen music, with its sampled vocal hooks. Wario has found his voice too, loudly expressing his joy or dismay at finding treasure or taking damage. Particularly notable is the sound room, where you can listen to tracks unlocked by finding hidden CDs in each stage. Weirdly, it isn't actually the music from said stage, it's just experimental, occasionally ambient soundscapes. They're even accompanied by bizarre two-frame animations, including real people dressed as Wario, the sort of madcap imagery that would appear in WarioWare in the years that followed. It really just embodies the corrosive punk spirit against what's expected of a Nintendo platformer, especially one that stems from a basis as relatively safe and conservative as Mario. I'd recommend the video by Geno7 that goes in depth about the technical wizardry and experimentation that went into the OST. I'll include a link to that one for you to enjoy, after you've watched the rest of my videos of course. Each passage culminates in a boss fight, before which you can access the minigame shop. The ones in Wario Land 4 are the most fun in the series, and I remember spending a lot of time attempting to beat my high scores on them. They've been present from the start, but really hit their addictive stride here. Again, perhaps a precursor to WarioWare. The Wario Hop is a rhythm game where he rides a wheel through the desert, jumping over hurdles in time with the music, the speed increasing the further you go. Oh, sexy cactus there. The home run derby involves pressing A with the right timing to hit the ball without striking out, if my baseball terminology is correct. It's super satisfying to knock it out of the park, but I never did learn how to interpret the nods that the pitcher makes before throwing, so found it pretty impossible after a while. Wario's Roulette is a memory puzzle that briefly shows you his face with a set of mismatched features before having you replicate them by pressing A as a carousel of different ones revolves around his head. Scoring high on them will earn you medals, which can then be used to buy weapons to deal some damage to the target before the bell rings, while Wario pumps iron. These ghouls have some brilliantly gruesome, elaborate designs and pristine animations. I think my favourite one is Catbat. There's so much going on in the battle that it descends into a chaotically good time. There's a pleasing tactility around a rodent too, bursting the inflatable bear so that it flips upside down for you to whack the wee rat guy. Each villain guards a legendary treasure, as well as 3 other chests which will start to disappear if it takes you too long to wrap things up. Defeating all of the bosses unlocks the Golden Passage. Here you land on the frog switch upon entry, meaning the entire stage is a race to get to the end, grab Keyser and get back. It's arduous enough, but easier and shorter than I remember. Even being out of practice and having a hazy memory of its layout when playing all these years later, I still made it back with like 3 minutes to spare. In fairness, there is a hard mode available from the get-go, as well as an unlockable super hard mode for beating that, so there is a greater, more restrictive trial waiting for those who are willing to put in the time and effort. The final showdown is with the Golden Diva, a big howling banshee who hides her grotesque physique under a set of Japanese no theatre style masks, while donning the bling bling of her 4 defeated underlings. This encounter is a frenzied test of your reactions and knowledge of Wario's transformations, including throwing a hammer upwards to land on his head and squash him into his spring form. With one conclusory pow right in the kisser, she's vanquished. At that point though, the pyramid begins to collapse. Wario, Kuroneko and Professor Wankenstein make like Indy and escape. The legendary treasure flies down to the little black cat who morphs into Princess Shokora. She'd been under the curse of the Golden Diva and is now free. As is often the case, Wario has ended up accidentally becoming a hero as a byproduct of his own selfish desires. The ending variable this time is that her appearance depends on the amount of treasure chests you collected, either a toddler, an ugly broad resembling Wario, a beautiful young maiden, or a regal older woman. He gets a grateful kiss, which he's either disgusted or delighted with, depending on which form she takes, and she departs into the heavens. Wario drives off into the sunset with his booty, reminiscing about his expedition. A peck from a princess is reward enough for Mario, but for Wario, it's just an added bonus. His ultimate goal is lining his stomach, and a few days later, he's seen speeding off as he did at the start of the game, but this time, amusingly, to an all-you-can-eat steakhouse. And so concludes the wild ride of the original Wario Lands. These were integral in establishing him as a character, but while he still enjoys popularity within WarioWare and as part of the wider Mario franchise, Wario Land 4 was the last in the series developed in-house by Nintendo. But why? It surely wasn't for financial reasons, with sales figures consistently in the millions. I imagine it's largely to do with the dissolution of R&D 1, with team members moving on to other projects, but also because the Game Boy Advance allowed Nintendo to port over Mario's 2D SNES classics, which filled the platformer niche of the time, and in truth, were always going to be a more lucrative project than the anarchic Wario. New Super Mario Bros. Then followed, selling gangbusters and likely further cementing this as a more worthwhile pursuit for the first party team. It was obvious that the 2D Mario formula still worked, but Wario Land is something of a wacky corruption of that, and I think that's why so many people, myself included, love it. I don't know if I can call it a cult series, given that it shifted millions, but it certainly feels like a cooler, edgier alternative to the more predictable mascot. Researching and playing through the bunch again for this video has been really illuminating, looking back at how this unconventional derivation managed to gain such traction and grow into a separate entity, which by the end is practically unrecognisable as a spin-off. It's more like an eccentric late 90s, early 2000s cartoon than a cosy Mario game. This video isn't even comprehensive, as there was actually a Wario Land on the Virtual Boy of all things, which was released between 1 and 2. There was also Wario Land Shake It on the Wii, as well as tangential titles like Wario World and Master of Disguise. I'll maybe talk about those another time, as this video is already long enough as it is, and I wanted to focus on the core titles that made him. Although it's been 17 years since the last entry, and 24 since the last numbered one made by Nintendo, all is not lost, as its influence has started to be felt in indie darlings that serve as spiritual successors. Seems appropriate since Wario Land's design is redolent of the sort of outside-the-box experimentation you'll find within the independent scene. A number of games focused around burly, barging, looting, transforming protagonists owe something to Wario. The most notable ones are Antonblast and Pizza Tower, chaotic escapades that see their mustachioed heroes smash and bash their way through myriad zany levels, taking particular inspiration from Wario Land 4 in the way that they involve a madcap race back to the exit against a timer. It's so cool to see the relatively niche set of titles garnering a legacy of their own within the platforming world. And while it seems unlikely that we'll see another Wario Land installment anytime soon, like the anti-hero with the spoils of his adventures, this is a series I'll always treasure.